Welcome to another analysis and comparison video. Today we've got the smart rifle and we're going to be looking at all of the overclocks, breaking them down. We've got data, we've got maths that we're going to have a look at to see exactly what we're gaining from each of these different overclocks to see what is our best options going forward. I think first off it makes sense to break these into different categories so we can see which overclocks are up against each other, and now we can start looking at these in a bit more detail. The Seeker rounds go through all armour and even break the armour they hit as well. This allows you to deal your full damage and not have to worry about curving, and it even goes through the Oppressor's armour and solid rock, so all walls it's just going to go through and deal its damage. Armour Break module actually functions very similar, it still does its pure DPS and shreds the armour. Putting these two clips side by side, we can see they basically function exactly the same, apart from the armour breaking doesn't have that reduced burst fire speed that we see on the Seeker rounds. And also, interestingly enough, when we get to the end of this clip, the Seeker rounds has actually required more shots. And if we slow this down and have a look, this is because we see some of these shots don't do our 27 damage, they actually do 22.5. After some experimenting, I found with both modules, hitting the actual face of the target could deal reduced damage, not your full DPS, but also the Seeker rounds seem to be more susceptible to not doing its full damage even when not hit in the face. With the Armour Break module we lose the ability to penetrate Oppressor's armour, but we get that higher burst DPS which is going to help us with things like the Swarms and Glyphid Guards. Comparing these two overclocks against an Arbalast here, and we can see they function very similar, both going through the armour, both shredding the armour, although the Armour Break module actually shredded the armour quicker, so it's going to be better for your allies. It also doesn't have that burst fire delay, so it's actually going to get its DPS across much faster. This is a clip from one of my Elite Deep Dives of commentary, so I'm going to try and talk over myself here before handing over to the commentary, but this is where we can really see the struggle that Seeker can resolve. It's handy to have in your mind. Again, it's just really awkward place to fight with the smart rifle here, people moving around, the enemies getting involved in this terrain. The ability to shoot through walls can be really handy in places where curving is difficult to do. It does heavily cost us because we lose that burst fire speed, and that is going to make our DPS much harder to get across. I really felt that lack of burst fire speed really impacted what I could achieve with the gun, no matter what build I tried, whether that was ECR and the electric generator mod, or piercing rounds and unstable lock mechanism. Both of these options are in our kind of hybrid position here. They can either be built with the piercing rounds to be more effective against hordes, or with more single target focus. The Seeker rounds is obviously really good for those tight spaces and oppressors where you can just curve through walls in armour, but you lose that burst DPS, it's really going to make it longer for you to kill things, and you have the ammo efficiency issues compared to other options on our overclock list. Again, the Armour Break module is still good in tight spaces, but it can't go through those walls. It's bad against the oppressors, or at least you have to curve to kill the oppressors, and again it still suffers the same ammo efficiency when we look at other options on this list. Personally, I would take the Armour Break module over Seeker rounds, just so that you have that burst DPS, also helping your teammates by breaking the armour for them, which is going to be quicker than with the Seeker rounds. The lasso replies are slow. The more locks you apply on the target, the slower they move. This can obviously be really handy against bigger targets like dreadnoughts and oppressors, slowing them down to help either yourself or your teammates. There is a downside of the fact that it takes longer to apply our locks, and our locks can only be held for 5 seconds. We can't just hold them permanently to slow the target. We can back this up with something like, say, hyper propellant, so that we can slow our target and then we can get some juicy shots off on their weak points. For me, it feels this overclock just can't carve out its own role. You either want it to be really good at single target focus, so then it competes with Executioner, or you want it to deal with the hordes but slow down those big targets so you can use hyper propellant, but applying locks slower, it still doesn't feel good against dealing with the hordes either. It's hard to build this overclock where it's not just going to be completely overshadowed by other overclocks so that you can focus on its gimmick. It did feel quite nice when you could slow down wardens to a snail's pace and then be able to get that weak point damage, even at range when you're using the macro lens as well. Obviously it's handy on certain targets, such as a grabber, slowing it down, making it easier to either not get you or for your teammates, and we even have this bulk detonator completely slowed so it can't move here. My personal opinion is that the lasso, whilst it's interesting, it just doesn't do enough. It feels really bad when you're trying to use it on the hordes, so really it's focused for those single targets, but when we include Executioner, which we're going to have a look at now, it just can't compete. I've already said a hell of a lot about the Executioner Overclock in these 4 videos, so let's keep it brief here. And I think it all comes down to this: 40.5 damage with the Executioner, or with all of our other options, 27 damage is the most we can build it to do. So it's 40.5 or 27. That is what's going to make the huge difference to you, and that is why the Executioner is my choice for the single target. Also, it gives us this amazing extra lock-on speed. It's just so good. Big shout out to the people who recommended the mods for me, which I'm using here, and this really shows how much the difference can make whether you've got full locks with the Executioner or not, something I try to get across in those other videos, but with this damage mod, it makes it so much easier to visualize. For our single target DPS damage, the Executioner just completely destroys all our other options. Quick locks, high damage, quick time to kill, and it's the most ammo efficient because it deals the most damage. This is the problem with those other options. Dealing 27 damage per hit instead of 40.5, it's just going to consume more ammo and make them very hard to use. Looking at our first horde option overclock, we've got the Eraser. So this gives us a bigger magazine and more targets that we can apply. 18 or even up to 24 if we really wanted to. Now I've built this with the electric generator mod, so targets with 3 or more locks get electrocuted. Kind of like a crowd control stubby. Obviously we gain a bit more range and a bit more DPS using the smart rifle compared to the stubby. Through my playtime using this build, I actually identified it was quite hard to apply electrocution consistently amongst my targets. This is because you need to apply 3 target locks before they become electrocuted. With the wide scanning area, it was actually quite difficult to do that. Going over to the macro lens here, it actually makes it easier to apply those locks and to consistently get the super blow through rounds on targets you want to hit. I feel this build is pretty much directly competing with crowd control stubby, so I thought I would do some side-by-side experiments just to see what kind of difference we're looking at. Both of these options actually perform quite well, but of course the issues we're going to have with the Eraser and the smart rifle again is going to be that ammo efficiency. The stubby simply has more ammo and can apply that electrocution far easier to its targets, especially when we consider that crowd control on the stubby that can apply its electrocution across targets. Obviously we gain quicker DPS that we can dish out so we can take down targets quicker, but that's going to burn through our smart rifle ammo far quicker than the stubby. In this example with the guards, the stubby does struggle with the armor on the guards and it does consume a lot of ammo, but still it's going to be more efficient than using the Eraser. I backed up this Eraser build with a return to sender breach cutter. I tried using the hyper propellant, but actually even with this crowd control build, I felt I couldn't deal with the hordes when they got up close. I wanted a breach cutter to be able to deal some damage. Therefore the return to sender was a middle ground that I could still use it in a pinch if I was being overwhelmed, but I could still get that double damage on bigger targets like Praetorians and Oppressors. Explosive chemical rounds is our other option for our horde clearing, and it sacrifices some ammo and damage for a potential ludicrous amount of area of effect damage, as we can see in these clips here. So basically, as long as you've applied 3 target locks onto a target, the last bullet that hits it will explode, dealing additional damage. Backing this up with hyper propellant can also make it so you can deal with bigger threats easily as well. As long as you have 3 locks on a target, it would explode. Even if it would only take 1 shot to actually finish it, the last shot or the shot that would kill it explodes the target. As you can see in this slowed down clip, the first lot I apply my locks so that all of the swarmers explode. The second one I don't actually get 3 locks, so I fire each individual shot and then we get the explosion again. Needing to apply these 3 locks can be inconsistent and annoying, so here I get my locks and I get my explosion. And now here on these first two, I fire, I get the explosion, but because all of these grunts are bulked up, the locks apply evenly across them and I don't actually get the explosion. So here I get the explosion, and here it spreads out all amongst them. I don't get 3 locks, so I get no explosion. Now we could potentially resolve this by giving ourselves the aperture extension, allowing us to apply 18 locks rather than 12, but it means that our lock-on time is going to be a little bit longer, which can also be annoying when you need to use this in a pinch situation when the horde is up close. Another issue with requiring 3 locks, much like the execution where you want maximum locks, is magazine size. You'll be surprised how quickly you get down to hardly any magazine size, and then you're not going to be applying those 3 locks. Also, what can be really handy is you can have, say, an oppressor, and you can target it. So I know that some of these bullets aren't dealing damage because of the armor, but the explosion is still dealing damage to the oppressor and to the targets around it. Electrical explosive rounds can feel really fun to use, especially blowing up all of these grunts. You know, it feels like when you fire a plasma grenade and get a really big horde and they all fly around everywhere. Also against Mactera, it takes them down really quickly, especially if they bunch up. With the hyper-propellant, it feels a really nice middle ground hybrid build, where we've got the electrical explosive rounds for the horde, and then we've got hyper-propellant for the bigger threats. Here I can apply the slow because I've got the electric generator mod, slow in the Praetorian to then fire the hyper-propellant. Sometimes you wish the horde would group up a little bit more. Often you find that you're not really using that AoE as much as you'd like to. In tight fights with big swarms, it can actually get very messy. You get a lot of targets, so you don't get those 3 locks, so then you don't get the AoE. And also, trying to use hyper-propellant in pinch situations can be a little bit difficult, especially if you've got a bad aim because you've been used to using the auto-lock on the smart rifle. As we can see here, it can all get a little bit challenging, whereas a breach cutter maybe could have been better in that situation. So where does this leave us with our horde killing side when it comes to the overclocks? For me, I think explosive chemical rounds just completely wipes out a Razor. This potentially leaves us with 2 overclocks standing, executioner for single target, and ECR for hordes. Simple. But some people believe using the ECR in a hybrid role with that hyper-propellant can actually make it better than using the executioner. Potentially even completely wiping the executioner off the board and the ECR being able to do everything. People in the forums on Steam and in my YouTube comment section have come up with some pretty compelling reasons to use ECR rather than Executioner. So I thought I would put all of these claims to the test and do some comparisons to see really what is the difference between Executioner and ECR. Is one just good at dealing with single targets? Is one just good at dealing with hordes? Or are both of them in a hybrid position? I started off with the easier tests, and that was to see whether the ECR was more ammo efficient at dealing with larger threats such as an oppressor. This one I started to give us a baseline. I just used full amount of locks to take on this oppressor, so of course this isn't maximising the 3 shots to get the explosion. This is just to give us a baseline, and it's 64 ammo to kill an oppressor. This time I tried to keep it to 3 locks. Obviously there's a variance, sometimes I go up to 5, a few times I even go to 6, as I try to keep this down to a minimum. This actually takes 52 ammo to take out this oppressor, and I mathed out the most efficient if you only ever got 3 locks, and it would be 40 ammo to kill an oppressor. Using the executioner, we know it's 23 ammo to take down an oppressor. Realistically, I think you're looking at between 46 and 50 ammo with the ECR when you're trying to limit those 3 shots to taking out an oppressor, but we know it's going to be 23 if we hit all of the weak points with the executioner. Now you might say that was completely useless because you're just going to fire the hyper-propellant at the oppressor, so let's look at something more tangible, Webbers. So this is the executioner taking on 9 Webbers, and we can see this is 17 ammo it's cost us. Now if we look at ECR, so I've made sure that these are all spread out, so we're not going to get the AoE damage on these ones, so keep that in mind. This is just pure taking on the Webbers. 26 ammo to take down 9 Webbers. So on average it's 2 shots for the executioner and 3 shots for the ECR, which makes sense because on that 3rd shot we get the explosion which then finishes the Weber off. I wanted to do this with Acid Spitters as well. Unfortunately, the mod I was using, the Acid Spitters AI, just didn't do anything. This next test was a difficult one to do and to even contemplate doing, so what I did, I would spawn in at the same time 12 grunts, 6 slashes and 6 guards, and then basically each different build would then have to take them on. Now obviously with the ECR, because you've got the hyper propellant grenade launcher, you have to use the smart rifle to take on that horde, whereas with the executioner we've got the breach cutter, and the reason we've got the breach cutter is to deal with the hordes. So obviously with the video on the right I used the breach cutter, but the video on the left is just going to be with the smart rifle. And here is our data. I did this test 5 times to try and iron out any unusual AI behaviour, and as we can see, the average over 5 attempts, 96.6 ammo for the ECR and nearly 40 seconds, whereas obviously using a breach cutter, we've got 3.1 breach cutter shots used and 34.6 smart rifle ammo used, and it's at 18.6 seconds. Now I think this is a valid test, because obviously if you're taking that hyper propellant to deal with the larger threats, then you're not going to have that breach cutter to fall back on to deal with hordes like this. You are definitely just relying on the smart rifle. And if you do take a breach cutter to help you deal with the hordes to back up that ECR, then you've obviously lost that high threat damage potential, so you've gone just into horde mode, not into the hybrid mode. Another thing to consider is the average ammo from those scenarios is 38% for your ECR total ammo, whereas compared to the executioner, it's only 15% of your total breach cutter and 17% of your smart rifle. Some tri-jaws now. Ignore the middle one, because I don't hit weak points, I haven't counted it into this average, so it's 6 to 7 ammo to take one down. Executioner, it's 3 ammo to take down a tri-jaw. If we look at a Brundle now, 11 ammo to take it down with the ECR, and it's 7 ammo to take it down with the executioner. So I've slowed this down, and you can see we get AoE hits on all 3 of them twice, and then these other 2 on the left get 2 AoE hits on each other. And we're looking at now 30 ammo to take it down with the ECR, and that's with the AoE, whereas with the Brundles we know it's 7 shots each, it's 21 ammo. Now in no way is this small data set that I've just presented to you conclusive evidence of which one is better or not, but what I'm saying is a lot of people seem to think that the AoE that they're going to get from the ECR is always going to be amazing, and that isn't always the case, whereas actually it's probably a bit easier with Executioner to kind of math out how much ammo we're going to do and how efficient it is. Another consideration, and this is probably down to personal preference, and I have a bias towards the breach cutter, but the breach cutter is just so powerful against dealing with hordes and still moderately good at taking down large targets. It always seems like it's going to be better than the hyper propellant, and shoehorning yourself into having to have that hyper propellant and not having the breach cutter seems like a downgrade to me, but like I say, I have a personal bias towards the breach cutter. So after all of this, where does it leave us? And I think it leaves us in the fact that you definitely have the Executioner for that really good single target damage. You can quickly take down Menaces, Oppressors, Praetorians. I think ECR is still good in that hybrid position, especially when you consider using hyper propellant. I think if you feel that using ECR that you can't deal with those hordes, or you still have an issue with the hordes getting close to you, you can go over to a breach cutter as well. It puts you into super horde killing mode, but still able to do something and still do some decent things against a Praetorian or an Oppressor, so you still have a little bit of that hybrid position. Personally for me, and obviously I've done 4 videos about how good the Executioner is, I'm still in the position of using piercing rounds, having high voltage crossover on a breach cutter, makes it so that the engineer can do it all. You've got amazing single target damage with the Executioner, and you can just wipe out hordes with the breach cutter and plasma grenades. But what I have tried to do here is just present information to you. You might have really liked the look of Seeker rounds or the armor breaking module. The point is, especially with Deep Rock Galactic, use what you feel you like. All I'm trying to do here is present data so you can make informed decisions. Thank you so much for watching. This video has also given me some really good ideas on potentially what the smart rifle needs to make it a little bit better going forward. So my next big video is going to be around that, and then I'm probably going to put the smart rifle to rest for a little bit. And finally, I just want to highlight the mods I used and thank the authors of making these. It made my life so much easier when doing this video. Thank you so much if you've got this far and watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.